My father was a Army officer, and I was born in Berlin at the height of the Cold War. I grew up with very consciousness of my place in history, child of the Cold War, but also learning about history from everything from battlefields to museums. And so it was sort of written into my DNA in that respect. I start every fall when I study history. As a student of history, we say, okay, what we see depends on where we stand. You don't have to fetishize it. You just have to understand what you see depends on where you stand, and you have to understand other people's perspective on it. So when we change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, there's a reason for that, and maybe you should be a little sympathetic. Even if you're not of indigenous background, you'd understand that other people might see it a bit differently. So the person you have to be scared of is the one who denied the event ever happened. So we all see things based on who we are, and that's why history is a personal journey, no matter what subject you study. Science fiction is as valid a source as any other source in history. And so, I'll give you an example. When I was a student, we were watching an episode of The Twilight Zone, and it was a very interesting Cold War episode. He weaved an entire discussion about paranoia versus, is there really a threat? I kind of filed it away for years because I'd been a sci-fi geek from when I was very young. I started to rethink some of the classics I had read and realized that I could start using it when I was teaching the Cold War, but then I started using it in other subjects. So, for example, in world history, just this last semester, I had them read the original War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And I said, okay, and I gave them a set of guidelines to understand it, and it's an anti-imperialist tract. It's also been the most rewritten story in the last 100 years. And why is it a subject that keeps getting reused over and over again? Because it's one that could be refitted for almost every era. And so that was an example of how science fiction becomes an iconic text and then becomes something that's ingrained even if you don't realize it. Science fiction and fantasy are ways of expressing everything from anxiety as well as aspiration. And so by being able to understand that this is the stress point of a society, this is the anxiety of a society, that it helps you understand that society, and you can have some fun studying it. Most of my students don't actually go into a history class thinking we could have some fun. And that's something, well, you can actually, if you just let yourself open up your mind on these things. Scholars tend to be very lazy. They tend to re-look at the same question over and over again, which has its validity. But if you look at the same question over again using new sources, that's when things get interesting. And so if we look at the Cold War through the lens of science fiction, it becomes something a little more dramatic. If you look at the question of religious fundamentalism through the lens of science fiction, it becomes somewhat more three-dimensional. It's a source that enriches and enlivens, especially when it comes to teaching,